The new patch for Path of Exile 2 was just announced, and a 2-hour-plus interview was done immediately after that announcement with Darth Microtransaction and GahzzyTV. I have been utterly addicted to this game, and I can't seem to tear myself away from it. Although I do have some frustrations as a new player to ARPGs, that doesn't mean it takes away from my fun. Although people in my comments section like to tell me that. But what blows me away so much about GGG is their connection to their community. I haven't been exposed to a game company that really wants to connect with their community like this. And on top of that, listening to this interview, I listened to it as a new player, perking my ears up for things that a new player, such as myself, wants to hear. How are they addressing my issues as a new player? How are they addressing just new player issues in general? Are they just going to skip over it? Are they only going to go for the top 1% of players? Are they really only going to care about the existing guys that are there? Or are they taking feedback from everyone and really trying to find that balance? And honestly, I think they are. So through their brutal honesty about themselves and their brutal honesty about the players, here are some of the highlights from the 2-hour-long interview and my thoughts as a new player and how I feel with the future of Path of Exile 2. And is this actually going to be my entry and my long journey into more ARPGs? So let's get started here.
Just for in-game maps is the changes to, you mentioned monsters, chests, rare monsters. What impact are you guys hoping that this change specifically is going to have in in-game mapping?
Well, I want this. Well, there's a couple things. It is just a general, probably 30% more kind of monsters, items, etc. from inherent maps. You get the thing where now the inherent map is higher value, and thus proportionately the league is less impactful, say Breach, which is obviously in its own universe of craziness right now. But the idea is the base map is more rewarding, and thus adding the extra content is less necessary for, say, map sustain. The other thing is,
so right there, as you heard, they're increasing monster density to increase just, well, monster density. This is overall going to increase the amount of drops that you're going to get. It's going to make the gameplay feel a little less stagnant, especially on some of those larger maps. And it's really going to help a lot of players just feel that kind of action rush and continue. So there's a lot less lulls in the action. At least that's how I took this information. That was my perspective on it, which does make a lot of sense. Essentially, this is just a monster slayer game. And if we're spending more time walking around than we are slaying monsters, the boredom can set in. And I think overall that's something that just sounds fun. I am probably going to die a lot more because of this. But again, new player, so I expect to die a lot more. But moving on, one of the things that I just really loved, and it was right at the beginning of the interview, it was like 4 or 5 minutes in, they talked about trusting the community to learn what they were going for with the maps in this clip.
kind of cool that I want people to learn that over time and see what's beneficial, what multiplies better, and then you combine those things where you have this map's better for number of monsters, whereas this map's worse for number of monsters because they're multipliers. So like a really small map versus a really large map, actually before they were relatively consistent. Now that large map might have twice as many monsters as that small map, but it has the same density of monsters. So you don't just have big open empty spaces of nothing.
So going back to what they said before, is they're absolutely going to increase that monster density, but they are trusting players to learn the game and to understand how to combine your precursor tablets and your map modifiers and all of this stuff to make sure that you're getting the most out of the gameplay with where you are. One of the other things that I brought up in my review of the endgame was Waystone sustain, and how I really thought that I wasn't being able to sustain the Waystones that I was getting. And the answer that I got in this originally kind of put me back. I was like, wait a minute, am I just that bad? And then they kind of answered the question. For those of you who are going to comment on this, yes, I'm just that bad. But also, I thought this was highly interesting for those players out there who are having Waystone sustain and how they're thinking about it. So there's about 3 different clips here that I want to show you that I thought were radically interesting, and how they are looking at the new player progression with Waystones and how they're thinking about you guys out there that might have been having the same problem as me.
are obviously going to impact Waystone sustain. So you think this is going to help alleviate some of the feedback we've seen related to there?
That one's pretty interesting because, and this is probably going to be a controversial thing to say, but like we don't know that there necessarily is a problem with Waystone sustain as such. So that means we have to look into, if people say that there is, and that means we have to understand why that is, because I don't think that's the experience that like we're having as we're playing ourselves. And like
I suspect it's also just a lot of people struggling with the difficulty in dying, and like, you know, it's obviously very different if you're dying even in 30% of your maps, 20% of your maps. I mean, even 10% of your maps. It can make that difference. So yeah, there's definitely 100% more to look into there.
There is a slightly more subtle thing going on, I think, which it's kind of unfortunate how this turned out, but effectively, because you can power through the map tiers really fast, it means that you don't get a chance to find the gear that you would otherwise have as you went through those tiers. And that means that effectively when you do, like you might be playing higher tier maps than what you really should be playing for the amount of like wealth that you've found. And that means that your map sustain is bad because you're dying more often because you're kind of playing higher tier content. And that is on us because we like need to adjust that so that you you only start effectively, in order to progress up the tiers, it needs to be more that we need to sort of gear check you more as you go up a little bit to make sure that you've got the gear you need before you're going up the tiers. But this is going to be a really subtle and tricky thing to get exactly right. Like, there's quite a lot to that.
That was highly interesting to hear, and how they think about this from a game designer's perspective. Again, as a player, you're just like, wait a minute, why? But for instance, for me, like my experience was that as I was going through the end game, I got up to like T5s and T6 maps, and then I got smacked hard, and I got hit really hard, and basically went from T6s down back to T2s. And for me, I was sitting there going, well, I'm just not getting enough waystones. And Jonathan's answer is, well, it might be a little more interesting. We might have made it to where the players are kind of blasting for a while, especially if you get on that high and you're just in the zone. But then all of a sudden they're progressing. Basically, they're out kicking their coverage. For those of you in America, you've heard that before, right? The players are out kicking their coverage, and when they finally do got in those higher maps, it's because they were progressing beyond what their gear should probably let them progress. They should definitely have more gear checks to let the player know, hey, you're not ready for that yet. And the fact that Jonathan said that was on them, again, just blows me away to hear game developers say, yeah, that's on us. And to hear the fine balance that they want to go with. I'm absolutely blown away here, guys. I'm not used to this. What got me into Path of Exile was seeing an interview with Jonathan, and that's what made me go, well, all right, I'll give it a shot. I'll give it a shot. And now I'm just blown away. It's so crazy to see game developers who actually care to not just say it's a numbers issue necessarily, to say it's more complicated than that, but they can articulate why it's a little more complicated in most of the instances. Moving on, they really wanted to talk about the feeling of endgame and like a narrative progression and how endgame just feels radically different than the campaign. Now, this is something that I didn't really talk about in any of my reviews for it because, well, I'm a new player. That's just how it's supposed to be, right? Well, I have heard some other players that have been introduced to, some other YouTubers and other content creators, talk about the different feeling and how the endgame feels like PoE 1. I didn't play PoE 1, but listen to how they talk about the endgame, the feeling of endgame, and what they're thinking to do, again, for new players out there.
Is that like just the way the progression feels just isn't as good as PoE 1 in some way. That's kind of slightly hard to define. Like in terms of just like the feeling of like the progress you're making just isn't quite right. So I think we need to do more. Like there might be some changes we have to make to how the Atlas works to make that better.
Certainly want some bosses between those points.
Yeah. Like it just needs more of a feeling of
random ones.
Yeah.
I mean like actual ones that are still along a series of objective-driven kind of narrative-involved things where you're getting your still an end game, not pinnacle boss at tier 6 and maybe at tier 11 and they're the quest versions and you're doing those, and then maybe there's Uber versions, and I'm just rambling.
So just overall, go back to the feeling that you had in the campaign. You have this narrative drive. It's not just go do this many waystones, go do that many waystones. It is like, hey, there's a reason your character is doing this, right? And obviously, I'm sure there's lore implications as to why your character is doing this, but for a guy like me, I just kind of blasted through the campaign, didn't really listen to the lore. In fact, I play without headphones in. It's just, I have a lot of noise around me a lot of the time, so oftentimes I just take my headphones out and I play games silently because, well, I'm just weird like that. But then they got into the tutorialization of endgame.
With regard to how that progression feels. So that's one element. So the next one is that the tutorialization of the endgame is not really there. Like, we need to do more around this so that, like, it actually sort of eases you into endgame a little bit better, as far as, like, if you're a new player, like, we kind of just throw you in the deep. Like, we fixed a lot of things about the introduction to the game through the campaign, but then you get to endgame and it's kind of like we don't really do enough to kind of really ease you in there, I would say.
And this is something that I kind of had a thought in my head about. I don't remember if I said it in my endgame when I was reviewing the endgame, which is the largest viewed channel, or largest viewed video on my channel, by the way. Thank you everybody for checking that out. And if you're returning from that video, thank you so much. That just made my day when I saw that number. Thank you all for that. But I don't remember if I talked about that, but getting into the end game, it was just, it was kind of like, oh, what's this new piece? How do I figure that out? And I talked with my buddy about it, and I had to, and I was listening to some streamers, Rax. I like listening to Rax because he streams when I'm at work, so I can just listen to what he's saying and hear him interact with his chat. And that's such a really great thing to hear and get information from, but a lot of that information isn't in the game. And that is something that I really think, I don't like games where you have to go to a third-party source and then come back, and it doesn't. I feel like the game should present that information to me. And GGG and Jonathan, they feel like that information also needs to be presented to you. Sorry about that hard edit right there. My daughter had to come in and tell me something. So going forward, they also talked about tier progression and it being too fast for meaningful gameplay. They already kind of touched on this a little earlier, but they expanded on it here.
Just a second ago, but like the way that you progress through the tiers, like you can go through the tiers too quickly and then you kind of get left behind with like what rewards you should be getting, and like in order for us to fix that, we kind of need to make each tier more meaningful with regard to what you have to do there and what's going on. So there'll probably just be more there.
So they're not just talking about the fact that players can go too quickly through the tiers and then they kind of get smacked down and then they're having waystone sustain problems, which was really interesting. But now they're talking about making you want to stay in those tiers a little longer by adding something more meaningful to it. Again, all of this as a new player, I hear this and I think, this is nuts. This is crazy that a developer is really taking this kind of time for their players. And it makes me happy that I bought this game. And I did my review of the campaign and I thought the game was awesome. Then I got to endgame and man, did I struggle. And my endgame review was a little bit more negative. And I did forget to even mention, probably in that, how much fun I was having with the game. That's on me. But to hear these guys care about this, it's why I got my wife into it. And I just freaking love it. Moving forward, they started talking about the one death and XP losses and what that means and what they're kind of thinking around all of that. And I thought this was super, super interesting because I think they absolutely listened to the community. And this was something that I mentioned in my review as well.
Prefer the whole like one death thing. As for XP penalty, part of the thinking around that is that like it's kind of keeping you in the place where you're supposed to be, as far as like, if you're dying all the time, then you're probably not ready to keep going up the power curve. But I mean, maybe that's like the wrong way to look at it. I'm not sure. I don't know if you've got any different thoughts about this.
If you're dying, right now there's too many penalty axes. So if you are dying all the time, you're not going to get maps, and thus you're not going to go anywhere. And you also, it's kind of like an add insult to injury. You're also now just not leveling. So
but you do have to have it. So
I agree. I think there's a few axes, and I think they're just a bit too severe when all combined together. Combined with, I also think that the very start of maps is just too difficult.
So they absolutely believe that penalties on death matter. XP loss on death matter, especially in that higher tier. And I do agree with them. That's why I did touch on that in my review, but I didn't expound upon it because I actually do think that some version, like death, should be meaningful in these games. There should be a reason that you don't want to die outside of, well, I might not collect the loot. And I agree with them. But I think everybody also said, it's too much. You just lose too much. And I don't know if they are exactly sure what they're going to do to remedy that situation, but I think that they at least know what the issue is. They know that it's just too much. And the fact that they're thinking about it and just hearing how they're talking about trying to solve it for everybody is something that, again, it's nice to hear. It just shows that these guys care. And I know I've said that so much, but it does make you feel good as a player, as a new player, because again, I don't know ARPGs. A lot of this could be normal to me. I can't tell you how an ARPG should be, but what I can tell you is how I feel as a new player, going through the campaign, going through endgame. I had a glowing review, and I told a lot of people that you guys are kind of whining too much about the campaign. Then I got to the endgame, and then I was the whiner. I mean, it's just how it turns out. But moving forward, the one thing that and this is the last clip from the interview I'll show you, and then I'm going to wrap this up. They talked about ascendancies and the ascendancy points. And this brutal honesty for a lot of the player base is the one thing that I want new players to hear so much, more than anything, because this lets you know that they also have an expectation for their player base as well, and that they're not just going to cater to everyone.
Our next question is, given the difficulty of requirements to get the 7th and 8th ascendancy points, is this intended to be something that not all average players can acquire?
We definitely wanted the final ascendancy points to be something that was like a significant goal. Like, this is an awesome, like it's supposed to be quite a thing when you get the last 2 points. Yeah. I mean, as for an average player versus not, that's kind of hard to answer. I mean, I don't know if the average player gets halfway through maps really. So yeah, it sort of depends on the definition, but we wanted it to be a big thing that you get.
I don't know if the average player gets halfway through maps. Now, I'd ask my buddy who played Path of Exile 1. I think he's played just about every Diablo game out there. He's played a ton of different ARPGs. I was like, what does halfway through maps mean? He goes, probably about tier 10. I was like, okay. Do you think? He goes, yeah, it's probably somewhere around there, give or take. And I thought about that. I was like, man, that is some brutal honesty, because I might be that average player. Even if I try and try, I might be the average player. And you know what? I might never get my full ascendancy, and I might never get halfway through maps. And that is an expectation that they are letting you know right now as a new player. If you're an average player, whatever that definition means, and I don't know if that's a skill thing, if that's a time thing, if that's like, okay, you've got kids and you can really only play a couple hours a week, but eventually you'll get there, or if that's just, no, there's just a skill. I don't know what the average player means for them. But the fact that they are willing to be honest with their player base and say, look, we're not going to make it easier just because. They're like, no, the higher pinnacle stuff, that does matter. The guys that go get that does matter. That doesn't mean that they're not going to do their best to provide a great experience for everyone, but they are letting everyone know, if you want to achieve the tip top of what they have to offer as far as power is concerned, that is going to be reserved for the people out there who either, one, have time, or two, are just skilled at the game. And honestly, with time, with the game, you can get more skill. And I don't know how that compounds. Overall, I thought this interview was absolutely incredible. I watched it live as it was happening, and I really thought that Darth Microtransaction and GahzzyTV... Gahzzy? Oh God, I just forgot his name. No! Oh, well, the hamster in my brain just decided to go away. Anyway, I thought the interview was fantastic. The interviewers did such a great job. And again, this really, really shows me why so many people have been just saying, no, GGG's got it. They're going to fix it. They're going to fix it. They're going to fix it. I'm like, are they really? Are they? Really? Really? Come on, really? Are they going to fix it? And I think they are. They are giving me faith and kind of making me a fan of a developer again. I haven't been a fan of a developer in a long time. A long time. Because you become a fan of a developer, then they start making decisions, and then it's like, well, wait a minute, their games aren't that good anymore, and what are they doing? And then sometimes they say stupid stuff online to cause drama, and you're like, but GGG isn't doing that. And that's what's so good for new players like me. So I don't know exactly when I cross the not new player threshold. I've heard a joke before that, oh, you only have 1,000 hours in Path of Exile 1, you're still new. I don't know if I'll ever have that many hours, but I want to keep covering this as a new player, from the new player perspective, from somebody totally new to the RPG genre, because I don't feel that my over 100 hours of time in the game right now is wasted. Almost 200 hours I think I'm at. I don't feel like I've wasted that time at all, especially if they're actually listening to the community. So those right there are my thoughts on the interview. How I feel as a new player with GGG, and did they earn my money? In fact, like, I will say this. I know that the goal is to turn this into a free-to-play game, and then they use cosmetics and quality of life stuff like stash tabs and things like that as a way to make their money. But I'm going to be honest. If this game evolves into what it evolves into, I don't think that $30 is a high price tag to enter. In fact, I think I've gotten more than my $30 out of it. Actually, it was my buddy's $30. He bought it for me because he was excited about the game, wanted somebody to play with, and now I basically call him every day and tell him all about how excited I am. Definitely a different feel to this video than my frustrations with the end game. I still do have a lot of my frustrations with the end game when I'm playing, but right now, is this how you guys feel all the time? Just you get to be listened to? That's a weird feeling. I don't know how I feel about that. But if you guys have stuck around this long, thank you all so much for checking out this video. I do appreciate it. Thank you all to all of the new subscribers that are coming in from Path of Exile. I do cover general gaming industry news because I like talking about the general gaming industry. And I would love to see you guys comment on some of those other videos and let me know. I know some of my videos, I was told that my videos look like rage bait. I do try to leave a lot of my videos with positive messages, but I do also get irritated in some of my other videos. I stopped yelling and screaming a long time ago. I realized I didn't want to be that guy. But for those of you who are new to the channel, thank you all so much for giving me a chance. And as always, until next time, cheers, everybody.